By the summer of 1945, Japan's carrier crews had been nearly wiped out. Out of every 100 men who once served aboard those floating airfields, only 9 survived. 91% of them never came home. What began as the most elite naval air arm in the world ended as a self-destructive tragedy of numbers. The Imperial Japanese Navy had launched the Pacific War with 10 fleet carriers, fast, deadly, and crewed by pilots with over 800 hours of rigorous flight training. They were the best in the world. But Japan made a fatal mistake. Unlike the Americans, they never rotated veterans back to teach new recruits. Every experienced flyer stayed in combat until the inevitable happened: death. By 1944, a replacement pilot received less than 50 hours of training. Many barely knew how to land on a carrier deck, even in calm seas. The downward spiral was set in motion. The turning point came at Midway. 4 carriers lost, 322 aircraft destroyed. But the true death blow was the loss of 110 veteran pilots, men forged in years of training and combat. Japan could only produce about 200 new pilots a month. The United States was rolling out 2,500. Do the math. The empire's fate was sealed long before it admitted it. And yet the tragedy wasn't only in numbers. Japanese carriers themselves were floating coffins. Their doctrine was built on offensive spirit over material weakness. In practice, this meant they invested nothing in serious damage control. Americans trained whole firefighting schools. The Japanese had buckets. When the taiho was struck by a single torpedo, the crew didn't shut down the ventilation. Fumes spread throughout the ship until one spark turned the massive carrier into a fireball. 6 hours after impact, the pride of the fleet was gone. Japanese carriers were disasters waiting to happen. Aircraft were crammed into every available space, hangars, passages, even along the decks. The Akagi carried 91 planes in space meant for 60. It only took one bomb penetrating the hangar to set off a chain reaction. Instead of destroying a single plane, the blast wiped out 20, and then the whole hangar followed. Unlike American carriers, which armed and fueled their planes out in the open air of the flight deck, the Japanese did it inside enclosed hangars. That decision turned every bombing run into a potential massacre. At Midway, the Kaga was struck by just 4 bombs. 9 minutes later, 711 sailors were dead. Survivors described the hangar as a furnace, fed by exploding aircraft and rivers of aviation fuel. Even worse, the carriers had almost no effective defense. Until 1944, not a single Japanese carrier was equipped with radar-directed anti-aircraft guns. Gunners aimed by hand at dive bombers screaming in at over 400 miles per hour. Their chance of hitting was barely 2%. Meanwhile, American carriers, with radar guidance, boasted an 18% hit probability. The imbalance wasn't just tactical, it was suicidal, and the disparity only grew. After Midway, Japan still had 6 fleet carriers and hurried to build 7 more. But across the ocean, the United States was building on an industrial scale never before seen. 19 new carriers launched in 1944 alone, compared to just 1 for Japan. By the end, America fielded 90 fleet carriers. 90. Japan could never hope to match it. The numbers tell the full story of annihilation. At the war's start, Japan boasted 3,500 trained carrier aviators. By 1945, only 112 remained alive. Nearly 25,000 sailors had gone down with their carriers, men who had believed that sheer fighting spirit could somehow outmatch industrial reality. But spirit could not replace factories, training programs, or radar. The carrier arm that had once revolutionized naval warfare at Pearl Harbor ended the war as little more than a mass grave. Not defeated in a single decisive battle, but bled dry by mathematics, outproduced, outtrained, and undone by a refusal to adapt. In the end, the Japanese carrier fleet didn't simply lose, it committed industrial seppuku, dragging 91% of its men down with it. The story of Japan's carriers ends not with a climactic battle at sea, but with silence. When the war was finally over, rusting hulks lay at anchor or at the bottom of the ocean, silent witnesses to a nation's fatal gamble. The proud decks that once launched Pearl Harbor's strike now lay shattered, twisted, and blackened by fire. The numbers tell the horror: 3,500 trained carrier aviators at the start. By surrender, Only 112 lived. Nearly 25,000 sailors never saw land again. Whole generations of young men were consumed by a machine that believed willpower could replace fuel, training, and steel. The carriers were supposed to be the symbol of Japan's modern strength. Fast, lethal, unstoppable. Instead, they became floating coffins, ships that promised glory delivered only cremation. Crews lived with the knowledge that survival was never part of the mission profile. They sailed not toward victory, but toward oblivion. Perhaps the darkest truth is that Japan's carriers weren't destroyed by American bombs alone. They were undone by their own nation's refusal to adapt, industrial arrogance, blind faith in spirit, a refusal to learn from defeat. In the end, the Japanese carrier fleet didn't just fall in battle, it committed industrial seppuku, sacrificing steel, planes, and men to the cold mathematics of war. And so the last image of that fleet is not of glory, but of loss. The amagi, torn apart at anchor. The shinano, sunk on her maiden voyage. The taiho, consumed by fire. Names that once carried pride now echo only as gravestones. 91% of their men gone. Steel tombs on a blue grave. Flaming decks. Exploding hangars. Men leaping into seas already on fire. The names still echo. Taiho. Shinano. Amagi. Not ships. Tombstones. 3,500 pilots at the start, just 112 left standing, 25,000 sailors swallowed by steel and salt. It wasn't just defeat, it was suicide by design. A fleet that believed spirit could beat steel, a navy that wrote its own death sentence. In the end, Japan's carriers didn't lose the war. They erased themselves from history, one explosion at a time.